Kia ora, welcome to Under the Checkered Flag, MotoGP edition. I'm your host Kate, and we're just going to jump right in. This weekend, I'm going to be covering the Valencia Test. Everyone at the track was there for the racing in Valencia, something I found quite silly. I know it makes the most sense, but putting the Moto 3 and Moto 2 testing the day after the race in the World Championship, it does seem silly to me because that night you just want to party because you've got all that presentation, everyone's getting the awards and the trophies, Rookie of the Year, you know, that big cylindrical, is that the word, cylindrical? Anyway, that big trophy, that's like your party time. You let off the steam. You want to go out and have a few drinks or whatever it is they do. But alas, if they're jumping on the bike the next day, they can't just let loose. So I think maybe a day in between is probably not a bad idea. But I also know that resources are quite limited and track time is so valuable. So I can understand why they did that. So the test was for Moto 2 and Moto 3 was the day after. On the Tuesday was the test that I'll be talking about. It was the Moto GP test, and obviously there were so many talking points. We saw Alex Rins have a special livery, which if you are watching the video version, I will chuck on screen because it was beautiful. It was like this deep, dark blue with Monster Energy branding and red stripes. It was nicer than Yamaha's normal livery. It was absolutely stunning. And I think this should actually be a thing, because Marc Marquez also ran a custom livery, and his was, I actually preferred Alex Rins's, but Marc Marquez's was also pretty cool. Again, it was a blue with some red detailing. And I really, like I said, it should be a thing. We should be running test liveries. Admittedly, I'm in love with custom liveries, and when they come out each year, it's so exciting to me. It's just another development and interesting point that I enjoy looking at. I just think we should see more of them. In fact, the craziest livery coming out of this weekend was KTM's. Obviously, KTM must be trying some new aerodynamics, which we'll talk about later, but they had this zebra style livery. This clearly is to hide the lines and make it much more difficult to see the shape of the bike, but it was just like zebra-y, as though we were at a zoo and Binder and Miller were riding zebras. Again, the photos will be on screen, but my gosh, it's quite humorous to see this zebra-looking machine ride around, but it's a motorcycle. But I definitely think we should have test liveries. I know that these people ran their test liveries because of all the complications with sponsorship and contracts and deals, because they're walking away from Honda contracts, both Alex Rins and Marc Marquez. And there's some serious complications happening in that space. The biggest one being Red Bull's got a clause with Honda that they can't run any other energy drink sponsor on their bike for 1 year. Now, Honda's basically following Marc Marquez over to Gresini. Post podcast recording edit here. Clearly, I did mean that it was Red Bull following Marc to Gresini Ducati. Not Honda following him there. Just thought I'd cut in to say what I actually meant to say initially. And that means they've cut their deal with Honda short, which they obviously have written into their contract that they're able to do that. But I think it's absolutely brutal that they can't run Monster Energy sponsorship, because I believe Luca Marini is sponsored by Monster Energy. And so that's going to be quite a delicate playing field for Honda and for Marini to balance, really. But onto the testing itself. We're going to start with what looks like it's going to be my biggest disappointment, and that's Yamaha. So it looks, obviously I wasn't there and I'm not in that Yamaha garage, but it does look like they didn't try much with the engine, or anything with the engine at all, and that's really worrying, because we'll talk about it later, but Honda threw everything, bar the kitchen sink, at their bike. Yamaha just seemed to be trying aerodynamics, which obviously they do need to do, but it's a bit worrying to me. The aerodynamics they did try were Aprilia style front wings combined with a KTM style seat wing, and so it'll be interesting to see what that does for the bike, but they're still going to need to upgrade that engine, because we have seen so many times this year the Ducati just blast past them on the straights. Apologies for the break in recording there. My dog decided to jump on my lap, and who am I to deny Lewis the goodest of the very good boys? As I was saying, Yamaha do need to make those steps in development. Fortunately for Yamaha, they're going to benefit from these new concessions, which I will talk about in just a moment. And I think having Fabio Quartararo, Alex Rins and Cal Crutchlow all being able to develop that bike, we should hopefully see some major steps in the next direction, which is what they desperately need, because it is all signs are pointing to VR46 wanting to swap back to Yamaha in 2025, and a lot of that's going to be dependent on how good that bike is next year. So I'm really hoping for Yamaha's sake that they're able to bring something more to the party. I think these concessions are really going to benefit them. So what are these concessions? The new concession system has 4 categories. These categories are set out by the percentage points of the manufacturer that won. So let's say Ducati have 100%. Category A is if you have 85 points or more, so 85% of what Ducati got, that 100. Category B is if you have 60 to 85%, so 60 to 85 points in this case. Category C is if they have 35 to 60% of the points, and category D is if they have less than 35% of the points. So given the pure domination by Ducati this season, and that's very much helped by the fact that Ducati have 8 bikes on the grid, they're obviously in category A, but there is no manufacturer in category B because they've just dominated the field. So KTM and Aprilia both fall into category C, and I will get into what each category gets. And in category D, with less than 35% of the points that Ducati won last year, is Honda and Yamaha. So some of the big changes that we've seen this year are, for category A, they get no wild cards. So, sorry Pero, you're only going to be stubbing in for injured riders, which, given the attrition rate of the season that's just been, we'll probably be seeing you. They can have 7 or 8 engines per season. They can only use their test riders for private circuits, and that's only 3 tests per year, so 3 circuits. They can't change their engine, and they only get 1 aero upgrade. The test tyres that they're allocated is only 170. So category B is pretty much the exact same thing, except they can get 3 wildcards and 190 test tyres. It's category C where things do get really quite interesting, because they are allowed 220 test tyres and they get 6 wildcards. And I'm kind of curious as to if, for KTM, Pol Espargaro is going to be doing all 6, or if we will see Danny Pedrosa on the bike as well. I'm just quite excited. I love both those riders, and I do want to see both of them on the grid. However, in this case, clearly Pol Espargaro should be getting priority after he was shafted out of his seat. Also, they do still have their engine spec freeze, however wildcards are not subject to it. So those 6 wildcards could be very important for both KTM and Aprilia. In category D, we have Honda and Yamaha. Now they get 260 test tyres. Not only that, they also can use their regular contracted riders as test riders, so for private testing as well. That's one of the biggest advantages of this one. They can also test at any Grand Prix circuit, so it's not limited to the 3 that are above. And they can also have 9 or 10 engines per season, and there's no engine freeze on them. They also can upgrade their aero twice compared to everyone else upgrading at once, but that is on the condition that they dispose of one of their previous aero choices. These D concessions are massive and absolutely huge for Honda and Yamaha, and I'm really hoping they do help bring them back into contention, I suppose. And one thing that I have to give props to Honda for, they waited until these concessions were signed to bring out their new bike, and this new bike looks like it's a huge step forward, a massive step forward. And I think that's perhaps the biggest surprise for me from this test, was how clearly Honda have made a step forward. Now, I'm not saying it's perfect. That bike will take a lot of work to catch up to the rest of the grid and hopefully stop destroying their riders. But I'm quite excited because Joan Mir seemed excited. He had so much more optimism and said that the Honda had been revamped, basically. And so it's definitely going to be an exciting prospect to watch. The Honda that we saw had shed 6 kgs compared to the bike that we saw riding around this year. 6 kgs is a huge amount. It also looked longer. Now, I've been saying for quite a while that Honda does need a longer bike. The rest of the grid, if you compare that Honda to theirs was just like a stubby version. Maybe they've had to bring out this longer bike because of the height of Marini, but it's just a really interesting aspect. Hopefully, like I said, these concessions make those 2 manufacturers make serious steps forward. Aprilia had sort of a limited style test. I don't really know why, but they didn't seem to splash the headlines other than Maverick Vinales doing what classic Maverick Vinales does, and he is still the undisputed king of testing. If only he could translate that P1 into a race finish, I'd be happy, because he deserves it. He really does. With all the work he's been putting in on that Aprilia, admittedly his season was hampered by mechanical issues just as well, but he definitely deserves the win, and I hope he gets it. Alicia Spargaro did have to sit out from the testing. He did minimal testing. This is partly due to the fact that he was still nursing his injury. Let's not forget he was riding around with a broken leg, so you can definitely understand why he had to sit out of testing. Miguel Oliveira was also not there for testing, also injured. Raul Fernandez did look strong in testing, and given his recent performance, and given all the recent developments at, let's just say, Satellite Aprilia, that's, I suppose, what I'm going to have to call them, although it does look like it's going to be Trackhouse Aprilia, which is quite exciting, and having having an American team in MotoGP would just be incredible for the sport. I think it could be pushing it in the right direction, and definitely something that we could need. So the overall Aprilia, they were more of a blip on the testing. One manufacturer, sorry. It's early in the morning, what can I say? I had my girls over for drinks last night, and so I'm just a little bit doozy still, I suppose. You know, those morning afters where you wake up and you're just like, ooh, mistakes were probably made last night. I hope I didn't text my ex. It was one of those sort of nights. I digress. The manufacturer that did make some headlines, yet again, is KTM with their aerodynamics. I don't know where this, actually, I do know where this is coming from. KTM are collaborating with Red Bull engineers from Formula One, and so that's where all this aerodynamic innovation is coming from them. It does look like their ground effect device was higher on the KTM's fairing, which is a fancy way of saying that rear wing got some upgrades. You know, that little thing that you look like you can stick a pizza box on? It got some upgrades with some... If you think of Aprilia's front wing, how it's got the upper bit and the bottom bit, Aprilia's rear wing now has something quite similar to that. And yeah, I'm still not a fan of the aerodynamics, but it does look like this unconventional step has pushed them in the right direction, as Brad Binder did end up at the end of the day in P2. Considering where KTM were at the end of... No, it wasn't the end of last year. It would have been at the pre-season test this year. Sorry, that is my dog grumbling. I'm obviously talking a bit too loud for him. But as I was saying, KTM came away from that test in the pre-season looking like it was going to be an absolute disaster. And then they came in and just blew the field away, basically. And Brad Binder had a really strong season. I'm really hoping that he can use that momentum into next season, because I really, really want him to win next season. I'm putting my hopes on him for the championship. And I'm saying that as a Marc Marquez fangirl, and I will be equally happy if Marc Marquez does take the win next year. But I would just love to see a KTM victory. Maybe that's because there's a KTM bike in my garage, so I might be slightly biased. But you know, these are the things that we have to think about. In fact, my local motorcycle store has some Brad Binder leathers at the moment that they've got on display this weekend. I'll throw some photos up, but my gosh, they did him dirty with the way they hung them. It's basically looking like he's on all fours, and you just can't help but giggle. Again, I'm getting off topic a little bit. On to Ducati. So, all eyes at Ducati. We're in a certain garage that wasn't the factory garage. But I want to talk about the factory garage first, because Pecco Bagnaia basically said that they were just testing the engine. They weren't making huge dramatic changes at this test, and you can't really blame them. Ducati are so dominant at the moment that they don't need to do too much to stay ahead. They're collecting so much data from all 8 riders, and all those riders can analyse that data. All the engineers, I imagine, can also analyse that data. So it's just, you know, they don't need to come out swinging like the other manufacturers do. And all they did this all they did on this testing day was change up the engine a little bit, see what happened, and Pecco and Enea Bastianini seemed to like it. Enea Bastianini did let one comment slip, however, that Marc Marquez was already the fastest Ducati rider in Turn 8 of Valencia. The bro hops on the bike. It's his very first day riding a non-Honda Moto GP bike, and he's already going fastest into Turn 8. He finished testing in something like P4, I believe. I don't have the results up in front of me, but this shows that he could be dangerous. I am going to check on screen as well that smile. So when Marc Marquez just finished off testing for the first time, basically. So he goes out, the cameras are following him because it is the news of the season, basically. He goes out, he does his riding around, he comes back into the garage, takes his helmet off, and looks at his crew chief, Frankie, I apologise for this absolute butchering, Carcetti? And he looks at him, and the smile that comes across his face, you just know that he had fun on that new bike. And that's got to be worrying for the rest of the field. That's got to be so, so worrying. It just shows that he has potential to do some damage at the front of the field at the very least next season. I suppose Marc's test going so successfully shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. It certainly did have me worried a little bit coming in, because you never truly know how a rider's going to adapt to a brand new bike. As I said, Marc Marquez has only ridden the Honda previously. We did get some glimpses online, and if you search for these clips, they're on the Sky Italia website, and it's clips of Marc Marquez describing some of the differences between the Honda and the Ducati. I don't know if these clips were supposed to be released, given the fact that Marc Marquez is still under a contract with Honda, but it does look like the Ducati isn't as quick to respond on the throttle coming out of the corners than the Honda is, but obviously it is clearly more stable, and you have to wonder if Marc was still in self-preservation mode a little bit coming into this weekend because of how broken he's been the last few years by that Honda. I wonder how long it's going to take him to truly start pushing that bike and being able to trust it more than he could trust that Honda. Another reason Marc's results can't be too overly analysed is because he was actually suffering from arm pump. So a day or two after the test, we get an image on his social media saying that he's just had surgery. Seriously, the stuff these MotoGP riders are made of is absolutely insane. How can they just ride around while suffering from arm pump and then hop off, go have surgery like it's no big deal? The final talking point I'd like to cover, I suppose, from MotoGP testing, and that does mean this is going to be a shorter podcast episode, but it's the off season. You can't blame me for wanting a little bit of a break as well, especially given the fact we have had 20 races this year, and next year we're going into 22 races. That's a lot of content, my golly, and yet I love it because I just get to ramble and get my feelings and thoughts out, so I don't randomly start talking about MotoGP while sitting in a boardroom surrounded by important people. But the last point I wanted to cover was Pedro Acosta. I think having him come up as a rookie is incredibly exciting. I am disappointed we don't see him come up with another rookie. I was hoping for Tony Arbolino, but if it means Fabio Di Giannantonio gets to keep his seat, then I'll accept just Pedro Acosta coming up as a rookie. I think on one hand I'm excited to see what he can do on the bike. On the other hand, I think he has potential to be the character that MotoGP has been missing since Valentino Rossi left. I don't see him fighting for the championship in his first year. I don't see, 2013 Marc Marquez, purely because the field is just so absolutely close this year. I do think we're going to see a podium out of him next year. The reason I'm saying this is purely because, number one, we know he's got that amazing, incredible, natural talent that is quite hard to find. And number two, there's a shot from testing where Pedro Acosta, who's only been on the bike 4 or 5 hours, goes into a corner and he slides that rear tyre, and he slides it like he's been doing it for 100 years. The confidence he has in that bike already after such a short time on the bike, it's got to be a little bit acknowledged by the rest of the field, because to come straight in, be testing for half a day, and then power slide your rear tyre, it's just shows the incredible talent he's got. So that talent, plus the fact he can be a little bit mischievous, his character is a little bit spicy, shall we say. We saw this when Pedro Acosta won and he handed out pizza to fellow competitors' teammates, and these sort of little quirks and ruffling the feathers is something I do like to see on the sidelines in MotoGP. As long as it stays quite civil and we don't end up with a 2015 or similar, then I'm all for it. I'm all for a little bit of drama on the sidelines. That is it from me today. Thank you as always for being here and listening. If you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe. If you're on Spotify, I don't actually know what the feature is there, but like and subscribe if you're on YouTube. Have a lovely week, guys. I'll be back next week.